Tom here at Sharpening Supplies, and today we're going to be looking at how to sharpen Scandi grinds. So I've spent thousands of hours using a variety of different Scandi grind knives. I've used them to carve spoons, make cups, bowls, lots of different woodworking projects. A Scandi grind, short for Scandinavian grind, features a single flat bevel that extends from about the midway point right the way to the edge. The wide flat bevel functions similar to a chisel, giving you a nice surface to reference your cuts off of. This design eliminates the need for a secondary bevel, which makes Scandi grinds exceptionally sharp and quite easy to maintain. Due to its popularity, there are some Scandi grinds that feature a micro bevel. The micro bevel adds a little bit of durability, but a true Scandi grind doesn't include a micro bevel, but we'll talk a little bit more about them in a moment. So the optimal sharpening angle for a Scandi grind is a topic of much dispute amongst enthusiasts. I would say so long as the thickness of the blade is under 2.5 mil, then 12 degrees per side is a great sharpening angle for your Scandi grinds. If your blade is thicker than 2.5 mil, then I might bump that up to 14 degrees per side. So that means that Scandi grinds do have quite a low sharpening angle, and if you've watched our other videos on sharpening angles, you'll realize that that means they can be a little delicate. So that's why some people will add that micro bevel. Now the micro bevel, that can range between 17 to 22 degrees per side, but usually it's really small, so like under 0.5 mil thick. So you can see on this Mora outdoor knife that they've got this tiny little micro bevel that just adds a little bit more durability to the edge. Now personally, I don't add a micro bevel to my Scandi grinds. I'm usually doing quite a bit of fine woodworking with them, and so I can sharpen my knives whenever I want. Plus I strop them quite a lot, and that tends to add a little bit of a micro bevel. Because of that big bevel, sharpening a Scandi grind knife freehand is pretty simple to do. It's very easy to feel when the bevel is properly in contact with your sharpening stone. However, that really big bevel also means that compared to other grinds, you have quite a lot of material to remove, so the process can take a little bit longer. Later in the video, I'll share with you something I do with my Scandi grinds that makes sharpening them a bit quicker. In this tutorial, I'll be using some Nanoart Shasira Pro water stones. I'll link to them in the description below, but the techniques I'll be sharing will work with any sort of bench stone. Here's how you do it. First thing you want to do is inspect the edge and see what kind of condition it's in. The worse the condition of the edge, the coarser the grit you want to start with. Because of the big bevel on Scandi grinds, starting on a coarser grit will help anyway. If you're relatively new to sharpening or to sharpening Scandi grinds, then coloring in the bevel with a marker will help you see your sharpening progress. This visual aid will ensure that you're removing material across the full width of the bevel. So to start, we just want to lay the flat side of the blade on the stone, and then we're going to slowly tilt it forward towards the edge until we feel it resting on that bevel. With water on the surface of the stone, you can see as it hits the bevel, it will push some of that water out, but it's really easy to feel once you've hit that bevel. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to move back and forth using moderate pressure, making sure to keep the bevel in contact with the stone. Most knives that feature a Scandi grind are going to have an edge that will curve towards tip. In order to maintain the correct angle through that curve, you're going to have to slightly raise the handle of the knife as you transition towards the tip. You can sharpen the knife in sections, so you can hold it at one angle and do the flat section of the blade. And then you can raise the handle slightly and go back and forth and sharpen that. I prefer to try and get the full length of the bevel in each pass of the stone, so you're going to have to be a little bit more dynamic with your movements. So I'm just going to keep going until I can feel a burr on the unsharpened side all along the length. Once I've raised a burr along the full length of the knife, then I'll flip it over and I'll do the other side. I'll try and do roughly the same number of passes on this side as I did the previous side. You don't have to switch hands when you sharpen. That's my preferred method. what you can do is you can just flip the knife over. So if the edge was facing away from you before, the edge will be facing towards you now with the knife still in your dominant hand. Either method will work. So I should have removed the marker from the full length of the bevel and raised a burr on both sides. Once I've done that, I'll repeat this process and I will progress my way through the grits. So I'm going to jump from the 1000 grit to the 3000, then 3000 to 5000, and then I'm going to finish on a 10,000 grit stone. I like to take my carving knives up to around 8,000 grit, and so the closest in the Kyocera Pro line will be the 10,000 grit. You don't have to take them that fine, but for the woodworking tasks that I'm doing, there are a lot of push cuts, and I also like to leave my woodworking projects with a tool finish, and a very sharp tool will leave a very smooth surface. So I think it's worth the effort. As you use finer and finer grits, use less and less pressure on the knife. With the finest grits, you're going to be using very light pressure. As mentioned earlier, I like to strop my Scandi-Grind knives. So I like to use a leather strop mounted on wood with a little bit of compound on the rough side. Make sure you move the knife across the leather with the edge trailing. If you do it with the edge leading, you'll cut into the leather and potentially ruin your strop. Just as with the very fine grits, you want to be using light pressure while you strop, and you want to make sure that you roll the knife over the spine rather than the edge. If you roll over the edge when you change directions, you're going to round over that edge and undo a lot of the work you did with the stones. So I like to spend 1 minute stropping each bevel and 1 minute alternating bevels. If you've properly sharpened on the stones, then the stropping won't take very long. Then the last thing to do would be to perform some test cuts. You can do the classic paper slice to see if there's any burrs left on the edge. What I like to do, especially with my woodworking knives, is to cut a piece of wood. And so I'll inspect the cut that it leaves behind and see if there's any scratches in the wood that will indicate a burr still on the edge. If there are any scratches or imperfections left by the cut, I'll note where on the edge that is, and then I'll spend a little bit more time concentrating in that area. So that's my sharpening process. Now here's my tip for speeding that up a little bit. Since I have a Tormek, what I like to do is I will put a hollow grind in the middle of that big bevel. Usually I won't take that right the way to the edge. I'll just use it to hog out a little bit of material in the middle of that bevel. So I'll end up with what is essentially a flat over hollow. It's still plenty strong. I have the same grind on my carving hatchet and I'm slamming that into wood and it doesn't crumple or fold. It's a great way to speed up the sharpening process since you're only going to be removing metal from the back of the bevel and the very edge. Certainly not something you have to do, but since I've got a Tormek, it's nice to do. So that's my process for sharpening Scandi-Grinds. If you've got a different way to go about doing it, I'd love to hear it. Let us know in the comments below so everyone can understand there's not just one way to sharpen a knife, that there's lots of different ways that will get us the same result. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider giving it a like and subscribe for more sharpening content.